You're listening to the Rethreading Madness podcast, which airs live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We are recorded and produced on the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations around Vancouver, BC. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and this is the show that dares to change how we think about mental health. Welcome to our show.
I've never been further, knowing what the hell I'm gonna do when I can't seem to find my way under or over or through.
I'm Bernadine Fox, and today I get to speak with Eugene LeBlanc, who has been the director of the Moncton-based self-help center called the Emotional Support Group. Later on, Eugene will tell you how it's said properly in French. He's also the publisher and editor of Our Voice and has advocated for the rights of the consumer survivor community in Moncton, New Brunswick since 1987. Because of this work, he was awarded the New Brunswick Human Rights Award from the Lieutenant Governor in 2003. Don't go away. I'll be right back with Eugene. You're listening to Rethreading Madness. I'm Bernadine Fox, and today we're chatting with Eugene LeBlanc. Eugene, earlier I mentioned the French-based emotional support group, and of course that's in English, but the actual name of it is in French, and I was hoping that you could, in fact, tell us how that's said properly in French.
Yes, in French it's called Groupe de Support Emotionnel.
Okay. You were born with a cleft palate and lip. I guess it's two things, right? You can have a cleft palate and a cleft lip. I'm not really sure.
Yes,
Okay.
That's correct, yeah.
And from that, it seems that your mother was told that you would be, quote, mentally retarded, end of quote, and that you would never speak, and that you should be sent away to an institution. But it sounds like your mother did not do that.
No, they suggested that I be sent to Boston in a hospital for retarded children, and she didn't agree to that. And then my parents went and sought some expertise in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I had five plastic surgeries after birth.
Wow. Medical trauma is a significant trauma that we often don't take into account, especially when it's with children, because we underestimate how much pain and how much trauma that is for them. So most children don't get services to deal with that trauma.
Yeah.
These events in your childhood did leave you struggling with depression, but ultimately you defied that abysmal prediction that your mother was given. And you have now been working as a mental health advocate in New Brunswick, Canada, for about 35 years. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. And they had told my mother to scare her about going to Boston. They said he'll never be able to read and write, so you might as well send him over there. But I suppose that the courses of history changed that. After I graduated, after high school in 1982, I became extremely depressed, and I cut off my networks of friends and became a hermit, so to speak, for about 5 years. And when I look back, I can see that this Great Depression was due to childhood bullying about my cleft lip and palate. And then after 5 years of being isolated, I decided I wanted to be a teacher. So I enrolled into university. I got accepted and stayed only 2 weeks.
Oh.
I only stayed 2 weeks. After being isolated for so long, for 5 years, I wasn't able to I wasn't ready to interact with other humans in a university setting. So after those 2 weeks, I remember the day that I left. Before going home, I went to KFC for lunch. And I could tell there was something wrong with my mind and my feelings. I could feel something coming over me. And later on that day, I began feeling anxiety that took control over me, and I could feel, I had the sensation that the clouds were going to fall on my head, and and there was a literal beaver inside me eating me away, and the anxiety was just so intense. And I saw a family doctor, and he suggested I see a psychiatrist. He says, "You're not crazy, but I think you should talk to someone who's more trained, who's better trained than I am." So off I went to see a psychiatrist for 10 years on a journey of analytical psychotherapy. And he was from France, and I saw him for about 4 to 5 weeks for 10 years. And I remember the first session with him, he gave me some pills for anxiety. And then after 2 or 3 weeks, I told him that the pills were not working, and he agreed with me, and he says, I'll never ever give you another prescription. And he said that medication for me was a joke.
Mm.
So it was just basically talk therapy for the span of 10 years. And one day I asked him what my diagnosis was or why he never hospitalized me, and he said, "You're not crazy enough." And that reminded me of the saying I've been telling myself for quite some time. We are all crazy, but only the poor actors get caught.
Yeah,
So who knows, maybe I'm a good actor.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we all have to kind of pass in normal society, and it's the ones who can't pass, of course, who end up running into the psychiatric system in a bad way.
Yes, who are left aside. I was pretty lucky because there's not a lot of psychiatrists who see their patients for every 4 or 5 weeks for talking.
So just to be
unusual.
clear, you saw him every 4 or 5 times a week?
No, once every 4 or 5 weeks.
I get it. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much every month for 10 years. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened to inspire you to take on becoming a mental health advocate?
Well, back in '97, after I started my therapy with a psychiatrist, I'd heard that there was a support group in a church basement, and I'd had the pamphlet for quite some time, and I would never go see. And then one day I was feeling pretty low, and I was walking the streets, and I decided I'd go. And to my surprise, there was it was run by two summer students, and one of which I had gone to school with, actually, I knew. And this was in mid-August, and she said, we have to close in September because we're going back to university, and we're looking for someone to replace us, and no one who comes here right now seems to be stable enough to take charge. And they said, "Well, you look more stable." I didn't feel I was too stable, but anyway, they arranged an interview.
Mm-hmm.
An interview with the director of the School of Social Work. His name was Neri Saint-Amand. And he interviewed me, and I got the job. I got a job for 4 months, $100 a week, every week for 4 months. And I didn't know exactly what I was supposed to do. I knew there were people coming into the church that I could relate to. I was given a budget. My first budget was $88.13. I even have it. I even have the bank statement framed, and they pretty much said, "Well, go and do something with it." And that's not a whole lot of money.
No. Did you have a space to do it with?
Yes, it was. We had free rent in the church basement.
And was this the emotional support group?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And we started with very small activities. There was a coffee shop. We'd go to the coffee shop, and we do a little bit of we went for a walk in the park, and one person came, and two people, and three people, and four, five, six. And then after the 4 months came, I had to go see my employer again, and I gave a report of what I'd done. And I remember one of the interviewers, she said to me, "You're going to go far in this, I can tell." And I still didn't know exactly what she meant by that. But there is one particular event that really marked me. Is in the early days, we would accept a student for her practicum, and she came to our center. And I said, I think we should organize a pizza party, and we would have had about 15 people, perhaps. And she said, "Do you know what psychosis means?" And I knew it was a mental health word, but I didn't know what it meant. And I said, "No, I don't know what that means." She says, "It's people who lose contact with reality." And then I thought to myself, I'm organizing a pizza party for 15 people, and they're all losing contact with reality. What's going to happen? There's going to be a riot, or people are going to start throwing their pizza or furniture around. I had no clue what that meant.
Right.
So we had our pizza party, and no one threw anything. It was just a regular meal. Mm-hmm. And that really had an impact on me, because I realized that I wasn't anti-psychiatry or anti-mental health or anti-anything. I was just pretty much pro-common sense.
Right.
And I saw that people who came into the center had the same kind of pain, different situations, but they still had this pain, and they needed to talk it out. And then there was this student who had learned from her academic setting that psychosis were people who were losing contact with reality, and it made an impression on me that sometimes psychiatric diagnosis, they act like an hypnotic effect, and people try to explain people by their diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was quite discriminating. And then after that, I began getting weary of diagnosis and medication, and I saw people who had 9 or 10 kind of pills.
Ouch.
They were on these pills for decades, and I wasn't seeing any improvement, and I wasn't seeing any accountability. Mm-hmm. If you bring your car to the garage, you expect that when you leave the garage, your car will be in better shape before you put it. You send it in. Yeah. But I wasn't seeing any improvement in many of those people, and I wasn't seeing any accountability, saying what we're doing right now is not working. Mm-hmm. So I started questioning that, and it really had an impact. And at the same time, there was this publication. There was this publication that had began named Our Voice, Notre Voix, mm-hmm. and the co-founder the founder of the magazine didn't want to do it after the second issue. So he said, "Do you want to take it over after the third issue?" And I said yes. So I took it over, and now we're at in early 2023. We'll be at issue number 75.
Wow.
We print about 850 hard copies per issue, twice per year, and we get feedback from we have subscribers from all over the world. A few in Europe, one in India, Australia, New Zealand, France, England, in the U.S., and mostly in Canada. A lot in New Brunswick, of course, and. I've been on this track now for about 35 some years, publishing the magazine and doing the support group It's called an activity center, and New Brunswick government policy in New Brunswick here is to they give grants to a network of 27 activity centers, one of which is mine.
And are they all like yours in that they are facilitated by somebody who is a peer?
Well, that's the fine print. It all should be like that, but there's a few, I think, that have the funders have tolerated a different model. But we should all be peer run. That's for sure. So,
yeah, out here in Vancouver in about 2015, I think, every peer-run support group in Vancouver had their funding cut. And so our peer support work out here disappeared.
Yes,
For the most part. Some of them have managed to hang on, but it really did a nasty job on providing peer support here in Vancouver.
Yeah, there seems to be less patience. I find less support for our model of care than there was about 10, 15 years ago.
It's such it was devastating, quite frankly. We just have to take a little break, Eugene, and don't go away, folks. We'll be right back. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I'm chatting with Eugene LeBlanc from Moncton, New Brunswick, about his advocacy work around mental health. Eugene, you wrote a book called Dare to Imagine, From Lunatics to Citizens. Can you tell me about that book?
Yes, we were, I think it was about 2004, 2005, I was in Niagara Falls with the National Network for Mental Health, and we were talking about, there was about 15, 20 people around the table, like the leaders of the consumer survivor movement at the time, and we were talking about a project, a national project that would advance our cause and advance our voice, and at first I suggested that we should write a book on the history of the survivor movement in the country, and that didn't really, no one bite, no one kind of accepted that suggestion. So I said to myself, well, if it's too complicated to do it at a national level, let's do it for New Brunswick. And of course, I knew more of the politics in New Brunswick than for the whole country. So Nere Saint-Amand, who was actually the first person who employed me back in 1987, who had moved to Ottawa, he was the director of, he was the teacher at the School of Social Work at University of Ottawa. He had a New Brunswick background in social work, so him and I got together and wrote a bilingual book en français and French is Osons imaginer, de la folie à la fierté. We printed 900 copies. It took us 3 years to do the research and the book in both languages. We had several book launchings in the province, and it's the history of mental health from the perspective of the client, not the perspective of the Canadian Mental Health Association or the perspective of psychiatry, but the perspective of those who have gone through the experience. And we begin with Psychiatry Arrives in New Brunswick. And psychiatry arrived from the shores of Scotland and Britain that came and colonized Upper Canada or the East Coast. And with that, they brought their model of institutions, of places to put people that don't fit in society. That's how psychiatry arrived in New Brunswick. And then it went on and on and on. And then in 1954, we had the lunatic asylum in St. John. That was really a dungeon to put mental patients in. That lasted until the mid-1990s, where it was finally destroyed by a wrecking ball. The government saw that it was no longer helping people. But there was a problem with a lot of French people were sent to the English asylum. So it was decided that we should build a French psychiatric hospital in the northern part of the province. So I believe it was 1954 and 1956 they built a hospital, but it didn't even meet the standards of hospital accreditation. It wasn't really a hospital, but they called it a hospital. But at the same time, I suppose that it could be accepted that it didn't meet the accreditations of the hospitals because we were putting mental patients in there. So at one point back in 1975, there was about 11 or 1,200 people sent to Campbellton, New Brunswick, and that went on, and we saw that institutionalizing people for quite some time they didn't really come out better than what we promised.
Well, that's also partly, just to interrupt you a bit, that some of the treatments back there were really quite traumatic and horrible.
Yes.
And barbaric. We're talking, isolation, forced ECT, medications where, in my opinion, were nothing more than let's experiment and see if this drug will work. Leaving people in really horrific living situations where they're not fed, they're not clean, they're not allowed outside.
Mm-hmm.
Very barbaric treatment, and I'm not sure why they thought anybody would get better there. It seems more that they were warehousing and using mental health consumers as a testing ground for things.
Yes, and in St. John they had an attic, and they would have barbaric practices. They even sent a undercover journalist in 1945 that acted as a staff, but he was actually a journalist and wrote 3 articles in Time magazine in 1945. I think it was called 8 Days in a Mental Hospital, and he said that the institutions in New Brunswick had a peculiar evil to them. So there was a lot of barbaric, and a lot of they're still in St. John, New Brunswick today. There's a mass grave cemetery. Over 200 people are buried there, 293 to be exact, and about maybe 89-90% of them don't even have a tombstone to acknowledge their names.
Yeah, it just goes to show that mental health consumers from a very, very long time ago don't have the same rights. They don't have the same human rights as other people are afforded, and when there is no accountability, people are at risk. So I'm not anti-psychiatry either, but I certainly am not pro-psychiatry to the detriment of human rights and accountability.
Yes, I agree. So
I just want to stop you there and just mention that you were also given the Mary Hudis, did I say that right? Pengilly Advocacy
Mary
Award?
Euestis Pengilly Award. That's an interesting one. We did our research for our book. I was at the Legislative Library in Fredericton, and I saw a reference in a newspaper about a woman in the 1800s who was hospitalized, and she secretly wrote a book about the ongoings in the institution, and I discovered that, and I wrote about it in the Our Voice in my magazine, and then somebody in Moncton picked it up, and then they did a play, and we did. I think it ran. We had 5 or 6 plays of it circulating around New Brunswick about that story. So it educated people about the subhumans that we see mental health patients, and it was quite a powerful story. And of course, it had a lot of potential to play nationwide, but the resources were never there to pursue that any further.
And it's interesting because she also self-published, so
Yes.
very early, one of the first self-publishers out there in the world.
Yes. Yes. The model in the late 1980s, early 1990s was perhaps patients who have gone through their own ordeal can offer care, can offer peer support care to like-minded individuals. So that's where that's when I got into the business of having financial support to continue our activity center.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the government adopted a policy of having a place aside from the formal services in mental health, having a place for them to provide care and support, and being better connected to what's really going on at the ground level.
Right.
That's something that psychiatry and the formal system fails utterly in.
Yes.
So that's how I got into the picture, and we've been in this business now for about 35 years,
Right.
and we're going to see if that is going to continue.
You were also a part of a hallway group, which acted as a consumer survivor advocacy council to the Mental Health Commission of Canada, which
Yes.
was a 10-year national project mandated to improve the mental health system and reshape public attitudes and behaviors regarding mental health. How long now has that commission been going?
Well, the commission started in 2007, I believe, and it's still going now. It went over their 10-year
Yes.
mandate. I was on the commission as a member of the hallway group for about 2009 to 2021. I left last year, and I'm the one who came up with the name hallway group. At our first meeting, when everybody said their goodbyes, I interrupted and said we should call this the hallway group, meaning that what is said outside the formal setting of meetings sometimes have more value and weight than what people start talking when they talk in the hallway. So it was accepted, and it was called the hallway group.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, and speaking.
Sorry?
No, I have quite a funny story to say about the commission. Back in 2017, there was a bunch of stakeholders at a breakfast table in Ottawa. There was consumers, there were psychiatrists, bureaucrats all over, and there one psychiatrist was really, really medical, and he didn't like me. And when he found out that him and I were sitting at the same table, he refused to have breakfast with me, and he changed tables.
Oh, my God.
And anyway, so that was that. And maybe 3 weeks later, to my surprise, I find out that I have been nominated and won the legislative award in Fredericton, and they're going to have a breakfast in my honor.
Right.
And I had breakfast with about 200 people. There were politicians there, and it's called the Andy Scott Award for Activism or something like that, from a federal minister who used to do a lot of activism. And I explained to them that a psychiatrist 3 weeks ago didn't want to have breakfast with me, but today I'm having breakfast with about 200 people.
Right.
So there were people laughed, and I thought that was kind of... but it just goes to show that some people who are deeply embedded in a certain frame of mind when it comes to care, to that point will not associate with somebody for a meal.
Well, let's just unpack that a little bit, because if he is a psychiatrist and he's working with clients or even instructing other people on working with clients, then that attitude, that hostility, and lack of any kind of respect,
Yes.
is going to play out in the therapy that he offers to his clients. There's no
Yes.
way around that. And
Yes,
so
absolutely.
what you're describing is a big example, but I
Yes.
see this happening all the time.
Yes.
Even to the degree that we aren't really given the same kind of weight when we say, this is what's happening for me.
Yes.
And a therapist will say, no, this is what I think is happening for
Yes,
you.
absolutely. The storyline changes.
Yes.
An interpretation, a third-party interpretation.
Absolutely. And so we don't even
Yes.
get to define what's true for us. And
Yes.
where that becomes really bad is when, and I do a lot of work around therapy abuse, where people have transgressed their boundaries horribly and have, say, involved their client in a sexual relationship. Even there, when the client is going to complain, they're up against this huge mountain that's made up of a therapist being already given the power to define what is true for now their victims.
Yes.
Yes. And so that's a little, that's where that takes me.
It was that incident was a blessing in disguise in a way, because it made me write an article in the Our Voice called "Will Someone Have Breakfast with Me?" And I explained what happened to Ottawa, and then what happened in Ottawa, and then the honor that I had been given in Fredericton. So it was everything ended up. Everything went well at the end, but it's a powerful example, like you say, of people's true mindset at times.
And the amount of power and authority they have that they can abuse without accountability, which takes us back to that point. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I'm chatting with Eugene LeBlanc about his incredible history as a mental health advocate in New Brunswick, Canada. Eugene, you and your partner in work, Neri,
Yes.
did some satisfaction surveys, once in 1993 and again in 2003. And I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about Neri and a little bit about the results of that satisfaction survey.
Yeah. Well, him and I did two in a span of 10 years, and we interviewed... I think we were interviewed over 70 people across New Brunswick who had received psychiatric care, and basically we asked them what helped them the most, and we gave them options. And I don't know what the percentage was, but I think that it was peer support that was the most helpful to them. And they listed psychiatric services pretty much at the bottom of the totem pole. And I do remember one director of a mental health clinic was upset with those results, and he had requested a copy of the questionnaire, and he wanted to know the methodology, et cetera, et cetera. But the people who attended the activity centers felt that they were receiving more care and more support from those entities than from formal ones. And coming back to Neri Saint-Amand, he was my employer for the first 4 months back in 1987, and then he always kept in contact. 1 year we put him, he's an honorary board member of our Groupe de Support Emotionnel. And he's always been there supporting discreetly our center, and always giving positive feedback on the Our Voice. Every time an Our Voice comes out, he had to call me or write me and say and give me feedback on it, and that won't be possible anymore, because in September of 2022 we lost him at the age of 77.
Wow.
I drove to Ottawa to attend his funeral. And, but Neri left us a great legacy. And one of the things that he did that I don't know a lot of people do is that he would teach in his classes. He would teach alternative means to mental health care and stuff, but beyond teaching, he got really involved. He got his hands, so to speak, dirty. He's got his hands in the mud, and he would work with the people. And he came to our center, and he would write articles, and he would support. I remember back in 1988, we didn't have money. For some reason, we didn't have the money to pay for the covers of the magazine, and I remember him taking some discrete funding from his university budget to help us pay for the covers. So he would do things like that, and he took the time, did the research for our book, Dare to Imagine, and he took the time to be with the lowly of the world. And
wow, the lowly of the world, hey? That kind of says it all in terms of society.
And he saw us. He saw people, when psychiatry was dismissing people, he saw them as undiscovered potentials. And I can say, I suppose, on some levels, I'm one of those potentials. But
absolutely, you were.
He would help us to. He wouldn't judge our vision of the world, but would want to know what our vision of the world is. So that's very. I met a lot of people who work in the academic setting, but I never met anybody like him who would go far and beyond his call of duty.
I think it's true, though, that, I mean, part of what you're saying he discovered is that when you push aside the things we think we know about mental health and the old stuff that comes and becomes a part of it, i.e. that people who have mental health issues are, possessed by the devil, or they are this or that, and you push those aside and you just treat people with respect and dignity and listen to them like they are a person, you realize that our ideas about mental health in society really do cause a lot of grief, unnecessary grief. It goes to stigma, all the ways that we deal with stigma on a daily basis because we have a mental health challenge of some kind. We have a new mayor here in Vancouver who has, his big sort of thing that he was promoting as part of his election promises was a new mental health treatment center. And of course, they boasted of all the stakeholders they were going to bring in to consult with about creating this new mental health treatment center. And of course, the one stakeholder that was not going to be in that room, of course, was the mental health consumer. And, it just goes to show that we're considered not to have insight and not to have, the ability to even talk on our own behalf about what it is we need to get better.
Absolutely. And I think that the highlight of my career so far when it comes to counteract that kind of attitude was in 2001 in Montreal, where I was asked to be the Masters of Ceremonies for an international conference called Madly Empowered, and we were about 400 people, and there were some people from other continents as well, and even the health minister from Quebec was there, and it was about a conference of 3 days where the explanation for our mental health issues was told in the first person, not on behalf of he or she or they, but on behalf of of me. What happened to me in the first person, and that was 3 days that I'll never forget. That were very magical, and it's a really a healing. Activity, if you want to say activity, or a real healing event to have sessions like that when you're in a room and you say something, or somebody will say something and say, "Oh well, that's the way I feel. That's what happened to me."
Or you turn around and make a joke about your own mental health issues or something that happened that is funny, and everybody laughs.
I remember these people doing a choir. They were talking about Aldol, how the antipsychotic, how it
Haldol,
Aldol, and they were singing about Aldol, and it was really a powerful 3 days. I wish we we had more of those things. But one thing that I've noticed about in Canada is we seem to have the financial and corporate capacity for our caregivers and our third-party advocates, where they have the ability to meet and advance their cause, but we don't have a national grouping, a national entity of for survivors, to meet and do the same.
Well, that's interesting. It certainly
we're a G7 country.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah.
There's also community treatment orders. I just wanted to talk about that because I know they implemented them in New Brunswick, and I was wondering if you could tell me what has been the outfall from that. Is it working? Is it not working? Is it being taken advantage of? Is it something that mental health consumers are...
As far as I know, transparency hasn't been in the forefront. We were supposed, after 5 years, we were supposed to get a report of how many people are on it, how many people are on it, if there's a benefit, and if we should continue that. And I'm quite sure we're near the 5-year mark, or perhaps we've passed it. They did have some consulting. They did consult with people prior to that, but I didn't feel that the exercise involved. This was a pre-hatch. The decision had been made, and then for sure we were going to consult the survivors. So we should be getting very soon, if they keep their word, the result of 5 years of Law 41, and I think that's what it's called, Bill 41. You'd have to double check on that, but I think that's what it's called.
Well, when you do get those results, if you have something to say about it, Eugene, you know where we are. You know my number. You come and talk to us. That would be good information.
Yeah.
We need to stop here, Eugene. I'm sorry. I feel like I just got started chatting with you. Is there anything that you want to say in a minute or so that we have left?
Well, when I look back at everything, I think that my pain and suffering was the training ground for where I am today. That pretty much summarizes.
And life experience is sometimes some of the most powerful training grounds. So you've learned well. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Eugene. And that's our show. My thanks to Eugene LeBlanc for coming and chatting with me today about the current state of human rights for mental health consumers in Canada. What a wonderful time I had chatting with him. My thanks also to Snow Patrol, Lauren Diego, Jan Arden, and Sherry Ulrich for the gift of their music. But most importantly, and as always, our thanks goes out to you for joining us today. Stay safe out there. I'm Bernadine Fox, and you've just listened to Rethreading Madness, the podcast that dares to change how we think about mental health. We air live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. or online at coopradio.org. If you have questions or feedback about this program or want to share your story or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, rethreadingmadness@coopradio.org. If you enjoyed this show, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.
I've never been further from knowing what the hell I'm gonna do when I can't seem to find my way under or over or through. Just when I'm ready to give up the fight, there you are when we turn out the lights, and it's alright. cliche, just words people say to be nice.